Yes, good morning.
Muchísimas gracias a mis por recibir aquí en este escenario.
I'm going to speak in English, but first I want to greet my compatriots from Mexico. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Vivi, for inviting me to this conference today. Let me put this, because I don't have a timer there. ¿Puedo ver mi presentación aquí enfrente?
Could you please project my slides on the monitors, my presentation on the monitors in the room, on the screens in the room? Let's start.
There is no peace without functional systems. Integral peace, which means a holistic approach to peace, would include, of course, the absence or reduction of violence, fear of violence, climate crisis, social fragmentation, institutional distrust. But that is the absence of. We also need to think about peace from its positive side. That is the presence of attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peace. And that is the definition that uses the Institute for Economics and Peace. You can look at the framework from this institute, and they have what they call the 8 pillars of peace. You can see that usually peace is thought of as something that is not. It is not war, it is not violence, but on the positive side, this depends on systems that distribute risks, opportunities, and dignity in a fair way. And one of these systems is the financial system. So just let me give you a clue. 2 of the pillars of peace, 2 of them, the 8 pillars of peace, 2 of them are equity and inclusion. So this is exactly what this conference is about. So this conference is also about peace. I study international affairs, global security, the absence of, and the construction of peace. And from my work, I can tell you this, and from the homework I've done on the GABV, I can tell you this. Peace does not fall overnight. It erodes slowly. And part of it has to do with institutions, and it has to do with the system, and it has to do with the lack of opportunities and the lack of equality. So your work is truly important in this moment that the world is living. I want you to think of this while we talk, because yes, we will be speaking about the world, and the world is not in a healthy situation right now, and we need to be realists. But you also need to think about the role you are playing in this particular moment of the world. 6 subjects or topics. Subject 1, the erosion of the institutional international order. We live in a more disordered world. For years, we built an architecture of a rules-based order in which countries, states, institutions at least had some respect for the rule of law. I'm not saying that it has always been respected, or this order has been perfect, or that there was no one who was ready to challenge this world order. But we are definitely living in a different moment, and it did not happen overnight. This is something that has been evolving throughout the past couple of decades. And you can see it in how different actors are ready to challenge the global order and institutions and the rule of law without fearing any consequences for it. And when you go to these type of conferences in my world, in the world of international security, you can see that people are completely disappointed from the global institutions, and they basically believe that this system is under destruction. It is not only under transformation, but it is under destruction. And this is something that we need to face, because there is more anarchy, and this means that security is not provided by global institutions. Security is provided only by me, by myself, and this means that this is the world of the force. Might makes right. And this means that you need to acquire military capabilities, number one. Number two, you need to show that you have these capabilities. And number three, you have to show resolve so that other people know that you are ready to use these military capabilities, because that is the only thing that will provide security, not the rule of law, not institutions. And this, of course, translates into armed conflicts, armed races, and this is in the context of populism, nationalism, and illiberal regimes. And of course, we need to think of how we arrived at this point. We need to reflect. When you see the distrust in international institutions, you have to move 3 steps backwards and understand that in this planet, 3/4 of the population, according to the Edelman Barometer of Trust, 3/4 of the population of this planet don't trust in their institutions. So of course they don't trust in international institutions either. But if you don't trust in institutions, then we need to think, how do we build trust? Or how do we rebuild trust? And that is something that we need to reflect on. But this is a reality, because this is the framework in which we are moving. Now, with that, always look at the maps. You have to understand that this is the planet where everything we do is taking place. And this is the planet where trade flows and where data flows. 85% of the trade is happening above the sea through these routes. But 95% of the data with which we operate every day moves under that sea. And that gives us geopolitical choke points in several places. So conflicts are not about just conflicts anymore. Artificial intelligence is not only about software, it is about hardware as well. Because you need to see how it supplies, where are the resources, where are the critical minerals and critical resources, and how they travel, where are the data centers, and why these choke points matter. And let me give you a couple of examples. This is the Red Sea, and this is the Gulf of Aden, and this is where the Houthis operate. So if you choke this point and you don't allow, then you are blocking 15% of global trade, and you are blocking 17% of the data with which we operate. Because this point connects Asia with Europe. So conflicts are not only about the Houthis and their fight in Yemen. We need to know about Yemen, and we need to know about the fight in Yemen, but it is not only anymore about what is happening in Yemen. So you need to read the news with that in mind. What happens here and what happens here, and why is Eritrea and Ethiopia and Sudan important? Because you can see here another conflict, and this is the most tragic conflict taking place in this moment. This is the biggest humanitarian crisis right now taking place, and that is the conflict of Sudan. And it has definitely internal factors. And we could give a full lecture about the conflict of Sudan, but it is also located in the same area. So Port Sudan, right here at the Red Sea, Port Sudan is a place that is being fought right now by Russia and by the US. And then you have the Emirates and Saudi Arabia supporting different factions in this conflict, and they're basically fighting about resources, about routes, about geographical positions. So this becomes not only a local conflict, it becomes an international conflict, which means it is more difficult to resolve because the conflicts are fought through proxies. Or you can see Northern Europe. And this is important regarding what happens above the sea, but look at the blue lines here. These are data. The blue lines are data, and the cables are being caught by shadow fleets right now, at this moment. So then you read the news and you understand why UK and Norway are forming a naval alliance, mostly trying to supervise the undersea cables and fighting and protecting the data. Or you can speak about Taiwan in another sphere. Of course, Taiwan is important for what it means for China and why the legitimacy of Taiwan needs to be understood through the China lens, and why this is a very, very sensitive case for the Chinese. But you also need to know that through this trade travels 20% of the global trade. 20% of the global trade, that is 1/5 of the global trade, travels through this trade, and 8% of the data. So when you speak about Taiwan and a potential conflict regarding Taiwan, you are not looking only at the potential or possible invasion of Taiwan. You are looking about the possible blockade of Taiwan and what would happen with global trade if that occurs. And there is a scenario in which this occurs, and we need to be aware of it. That is why China is trying to develop alternative routes for commerce that don't pass through Taiwan. Or you can see Greenland from this perspective. And this stubbornness of Donald Trump about Greenland, it also has to do with geography. Greenland from above, you can see it from above right here, is located in the middle of the way between US, Canada, and Russia, and through this Arctic that is melting right now, and how this is creating alternative routes, and why this becomes a much more important geographical position now than it was in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. This is a different moment because we are talking about critical minerals, we are talking about routes, we are talking about geopolitical choke points. And that is the importance of Panama. So Trump wants China out of Panama, and this is why. This is the importance of Panama. Just look at the spot and look how important it becomes. Or right now, I added this slide just some days ago. You need to think about the Strait of Hormuz through this lens. This is the place through which 20 to 25% of oil passes. And this becomes important for the global economy and for the prices of gas and for the prices of oil and for what Iran can do. And this doesn't mean that Iran needs to close physically the strait. It means that it can project the perception that it is a dangerous place to travel right now for companies to decide that they don't want to travel through that strait anymore. Not now, until there is stability. And this creates an effect on oil and the prices of gas and in the economy. So what we are looking at is you need to look at geopolitical choke points, you need to look at competition for critical minerals, for data centers, competition for routes and supply chains, and all the gray zone or hybrid aggressions. This is marking the conflicts in 2026. We have two active major wars right now, that is Ukraine and Iran, Middle East in general. But you have the challenge that Europe is facing through hybrid threats. You have also the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and we have 135 active armed conflicts. 59 of those involve state or state participation, and we have a very important number of armed non-state actors, such as we have in Latin America. In my own country, we have a situation of violence, which is a very difficult situation right now. We have the organized crime throughout all Latin America and in many other areas of the planet. And we have to take into account that state conflicts add up to non-state actor conflicts. So we need to pay attention to all those situations. Subject 4, now we can speak about Donald Trump. Because all the areas that I'm talking about precede Donald Trump and will go beyond Donald Trump. But now, if we put Donald Trump into this perspective, you can see that Trump will act as a facilitator to all these subjects and as a catalyst or accelerator of many of these topics. And for that, as I always say, we need to understand Donald Trump. It is not something easy. We are still in the process of trying to understand this particular character. We have been following Trump since basically 2015, 2016, every day. And I would say to you this, every single day, every single speech, every single event, how he reacts, what are the most important things for his mind, how he makes decisions. And we are still in the process of learning. But we have learned some things, at least a few things we have learned. One is the diagnosis. And if you try to understand Trump, for example, now, he will stop or he will not stop the war in Iran. Or before that, will he attack Venezuela or he will not attack Venezuela? You need to really enter his mind. And his mind starts from a diagnosis. America is in decline. It is a country that lives under lack of law and order. It is not me, it is him speaking. It is completely under disorder. It has no control of its borders. Through its borders, enter the worst of other countries. That is his words. The worst of other countries. Terrorists, criminals, rapists enter the US through these borders. So we need to put order in the border. We need to close the border, and we need to combat everything that creates border insecurity. And that is not a subject of 2025. It is a subject of 2016. You need to control what comes through the border. And that is why you need to project that there is a sheriff in town. Besides that, America has always been engaging in poor negotiations. Everybody takes advantage of the US. The US has not been able to negotiate favorable terms. Everybody wants to trade with the US under their terms, not under the US terms. Everybody wants the US to protect them, to protect their security, but they're not willing to invest in their own security. So everybody's taking advantage of the US, and not anymore. So, one, America first. And that means really consider America's interests first. And that is the way Trump perceives America's interests, of course. To make America great again. You have to understand that all these negotiations, all the trade negotiations, all these agreements are about regaining a proper place on the table, on the negotiating table, and give back the US the dignity it deserves. Because everybody wants to do trade with the US, everybody wants the US to do something. Well, you have to consider our interests first, and that is making America great again. And how? Through strength. We can foster peace in the world, but through strength. In this anarchic world, in this world where institutions don't operate properly, in this world in which the UN is not even good for its electric escalators, or is not good for, not even good for making the teleprompter operate correctly, in this world where the UN doesn't work, we need to foster peace through strength. And this manifested through robust anti-immigration policies, fierce crackdown on organized crime, designating crime as terrorists. And this is not about if you think they are terrorists or I think they are terrorists. It is about the designation, because once a state, as the US, designates cartels as terrorists, it can combat them the same way it has combated the war on terror since 2001 and on. And this means that you don't need to justify an operation in the Pacific or in the Caribbean, because you're combating terror. And terrorism is a type of violence that you don't punish after it has occurred. You have to prevent it. And the way you prevent it is you act under suspicion. If there is suspicion that there is terrorist activity, you go there and act, and you kill. And you find out later if it was or was not terrorist activity. It is justified to go and grab a cartel leader because the cartel leader is a terrorist, and you go and grab him and you take him to the US authorities, or you kill him. You kill him on scene. This is the war on terror. And this means that, for example, money laundering is not money laundering anymore. It is financing terrorism. And it is combated through other different means. This has robust implications in countries as mine, for example, in Mexico, for the banking sector, because it is not money laundering that you would be chasing. It would be financing terrorism. And the Latin American security zone, the Monroe Doctrine Trump corollary, which is now known as the Don Row doctrine, which means America for Americans. And America is a whole continent, not a country. America for Americans means that this is the security zone. And don't misjudge. This is not about spheres of influence. Latin America is not a sphere of influence of the US. It is a security zone. And a security zone means that the border is extending throughout the whole continent. And you need to act that way. So this is linked through trade. You can see the global trade war. And if you follow me, you will know that you have to understand the trade war more through the rules of war than through the rules of trade. Because this is not for Trump as a trade tool. It is not about trade. It's about restoring the dignity at the table and making America great again. And then you know that War 101, Karl von Clausewitz said that war is the continuation of politics through other means, which means that I will use pressure and force and strength to make you negotiate under my terms. And if you don't follow my terms, I will apply the most pressure I can. And this is not about restoring trade for the US. This is about, for Trump, about restoring dignity. Of course, if you read Peter Navarro, if you read Scott Bessent, possibly you will find different approaches to this. But for Trump, it is all about the restoration of dignity and the name of the US and making America great again. And the race for rules and minerals. So, yes, Trump has been very efficient in negotiating different ceasefire agreements. And you have to give him that. He's very influential. He has a lot of weight. He's a heavy weight. Nobody could make Netanyahu stop but him. And at the same time, he will have the influence over Qatar and Egypt and Turkey so that they can make pressure for Hamas. So he will negotiate a ceasefire for Gaza. He will negotiate a ceasefire for India, Pakistan, Thailand, Cambodia. He is very efficient in that sense for certain situations, but not for Ukraine. Because when you deal with Putin or you deal with Xi Jinping, you are dealing with something completely different. You are in another completely a different world. And he has not been efficient in working through that. But still, this is Trump. On one hand, he negotiates peace deals. On the other hand, he projects strength and he starts military operations so that he can get peace through strength. And the only way to get peace through strength is projecting power, projecting force, and projecting strength. So we will need to monitor all these situations, the situation in Gaza, the situation in conflicts such as Sudan, what will happen with Ukraine, the continuation of tariffs as a means to negotiation, while at the same time, we will have to monitor what happens in the US Congress. Sometimes we follow into the discourse trap and we need to step back a little bit. The reason why Trump is in the White House now is because he was chosen to correct the US economy. That is the power that the people gave him, especially a very important group in the American electorate, which is the independents, that can move elections one way or the other. And this sector gave Trump the presidency to correct the economy and for immigration. And we could say that Trump is more or less doing good approval on immigration, but he's not being perceived properly on economy. people don't want Trump to embark on international wars or international affairs. Most Americans oppose the Iran war. Most Americans fear a long war in the Middle East. And the sector of independents, 60% of independents believe that Trump has priorities side-wise. 60% of independents believe that Trump should not be spending money in Iran or in international affairs, but on affordability and the cost of life. As of March 2026, Trump's approval on economy management is 33%, and the cost of living, he's approved 27% of Americans approve him on cost of living issues. So this is something to be considered. We're still far away from November. We will see what happens from now till November, but the Republicans could very well lose the House and even possibly, potentially, the Senate. And that would have political repercussions. We will need to see that. The subject 5 is regarding US-China rivalry. Just to say that this is the most important structural conflict that the world is experiencing, and it is because there is an established power and a rising power, and they tend to conflict. There is a trade and technological war, there is cyber warfare, information warfare, there is an arms race ongoing, there is competition for geographical spheres of influence, and the Taiwan issue that for China is the most sensitive of all. When you do war games and you try to game out what would happen with US and China, in almost every single war game, the point that ignites the conflict is Taiwan. So you need to focus on Taiwan. We need to see what would happen towards 2027, 2028, because this is an important risk that we would need to be prepared for. Right now, there is a ceasefire. There is trying to manage the conflict. There will be a meeting between these two men pretty soon. And what is being tested is the ability to manage their conflict and what will happen with global stability if that can continue. But we still need to know that there is a structural factor here that goes beyond Trump and beyond even Xi Jinping. So, Latin America, well, this, as far as I know, is not an island. Of course, República Dominicana is an island, but Latin America and the Caribbean are not an island. We cannot be isolated from these factors. And the world has come upon us. We suddenly wake up and we see that besides our own issues, there is also a high consideration of Latin America in international affairs. And this is because for this administration, priorities are border security, immigration control, stopping drug trafficking, or at least projecting that the drug trafficking is being stopped. And then you can read news as this one. This is a very good case in point, because at the same time, the extraction of Maduro, and this doesn't have to do whether you like Maduro or you don't like Maduro, whether you liked that Maduro is not on power anymore or you don't like that Maduro is not on power, because this is not about you and me. This is about how Trump and his administration frame it, and they frame it as a border security operation in fulfillment of US law, not international law. And it is anti-terrorist operation. Who is Maduro? Is a terrorist. And what do you do with terrorists? You go attack them wherever they are. You don't need to ask permission for those operations. You take the terrorists and you combat terrorism. Whether Venezuela is the most important source of drugs for the US or not, it doesn't matter. Because for Trump, what is important is how he frames the story. Not data, not evidence, but the factor that this is a law enforcement operation. And what is behind is, one, there is domestic politics in the US, which means they care for border security, for immigration, and for trafficking. Number two, there is resources, oil, restitution of what was stolen from US companies, and the access to oil, access to business. And number three, there is geopolitics as well, which means displacing or removing China and removing Russia and removing Iran from its alliances with Venezuela. So you have these three factors operating at the same time: border security, business, and geopolitics. All of that all together with Trump personality, and in this anarchic world that we are talking about, the necessity to project resolve, determination to use force. And then your deterrence goes up because people start believing on your word. And if you are true to that word, then people will negotiate with you under those terms. However, on another note, Latin America has always been a pillar of the global, legal, and multilateral order. And we need to recover that role. Latin America was crucial to the construction of, for example, the maritime law and for non-proliferation treaty, and was proscribed as a nuclear zone, which means that Latin America is a peaceful country. We believe in the global system. We believe in multilateralism. We, as Latin Americans, believe in the rule of law internationally, and we have built that system. We need to recover that role. We have a history on that, and we need to, again, start to cooperate towards that. If we really assess that the global system is under transformation or under erosion or under destruction, we as countries, and starting from Mexico and continuing through Chile and Bolivia and Argentina, we need to rebuild. Of course, there's a Milei factor and all these factors, but still, we need to recover our role as Latin Americans. And that is something with which I want to give you at least this moment of reflection. So, lessons. One, always look at the maps and see what's happening. And if you read about Iran, locate Iran and look what is happening in this place and what happens with these routes and what happens with cables. If you read about Ukraine or about the Baltic or about Panama Canal or about Venezuela, look where Venezuela is located and what is his role regarding everything that's going on. Number two, always monitor international affairs. This is a world in which everything that's happening will impact everything else, and we cannot be just as isolated from international news. Number three, we have to plan, not panic, but plan based on scenarios. We really need to work with scenarios. We did that with Venezuela before the American operation and after the American operation with local actors. And we are working with them with scenarios. What would happen? What could happen plausibly? And what is the most likely scenario for that? So, for example, negotiations of Ukraine. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And if this happens, this could happen, and this could happen. And you create your trees of scenarios. So if you do that before the Iran attack, and that is 1 year ago, then you prepare for any potential scenario. And you can, of course, look degrees of probability to those scenarios. And 5, you look the the degree of exposure and the impacts of supply chain in, for example, some of your clients or some clients of people that you work with, what would be the impact of these situations and the degree of exposure. And mostly, you are prepared for every possible scenario. Even those scenarios that have low probability, you still prepare for those. But because we need to know that low probability scenarios sometimes evolve until higher probability scenarios. So for our reflection, peace is not only a security issue. It is an issue of institutional architecture. This is not only about diminishing violence or diminishing war. It is also about fostering institutions and promoting structures that create stability. Just as a note so that you know, because this connects directly with this conference, in the year 2000, the World Bank publishes a high-impact study. It was done over 30 years, 3 decades of study, 60 countries, and the conclusions are very strong, very strong. The more inequality in a society, the more violent crime there is in that society. In other words, you cannot combat violent crime unless you combat adequately inequality, social and economic inequality. After the year 2000, we have another 60 studies in different areas of the world that validate these findings. So, building equality is building peace. And otherwise, you cannot build peace unless you build equality. So, at the beginning, I told you that there is no peace without functional systems. This is the other half of the equation. There are no functional systems without peace. It becomes a circle. It becomes a circle. And you can break the circle and then become a dwindling spiral, or you can create a virtuous circle and foster peace through functional systems and foster better systems through peace. In a world marked by polarization, conflict, and distrust, values-based banking is not an ethical luxury. It is a condition for stability. So very well done for the work you do. I really admire you, and thank you very much.